The air bit, dense and humid, impregnated with a metallic scent that recalled rust and something else. Putrid. It was a fog so thick it swallowed the horizon, transforming the landscape into a gray, indistinct blur. The mystery machine, usually a beacon of vibrant colors, now seemed a ghostly mirage, its lines lost in the immense white that surrounded them. Silent Hill. The name echoed like a cold whisper in Daphne's mind, who instinctively rubbed her arms as if to ward off the shiver that ran up her spine. "Ah, are you sure this is the shortcut the GPS indicated, guys?" Her voice sounded a little higher pitched than usual, and her large eyes scanned the fog, searching for any landmark that wasn't the cloud itself. Fred, with his always impeccable orange bandana, tried to remain calm, consulting the aged map he held. "Well, the map says it's the fastest way to the Artisan Cheese Convention, Daphne. And you know how Shaggy gets when he doesn't have his cheese on time." A nervous chuckle escaped Shaggy, who, with Scooby beside him in the back seat, had already buried his nose in a bag of Scooby snacks, as if the crunchiness could ward off the premonition hanging in the air. "Cheese. Cheese sounds much better than this fog, Fred. It feels like we're in a horror movie." Scooby agreed with a deep ruh-roh, his ears drooping, revealing his discomfort. Velma, meanwhile, already had her nose buried in a dusty old book, her glasses sliding down the tip of her nose as she read avidly. Silent Hill, the ghost town that served as the setting for countless reports of inexplicable phenomena and bizarre cults. They say the town itself is a purgatory for people's deepest guilts. She mumbled, more to herself, but the words echoed inside the vehicle, making the already heavy atmosphere almost unbearable. A metallic scraping sound grated against the bottom of the mystery machine, and a muffled scream escaped Daphne. What was that? A chill ran down everyone's spines, and the sound of something heavy dragging in the fog made Scooby's and Shaggy's fur stand on end. Fred gripped the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the road they could barely see. The mystery had arrived, and with it, the threat of something that seemed far more real than the rubber monsters they usually unmasked. Or what was waiting for them in the misty darkness of Silent Hill, and what did Velma mean by people's guilts? The answer seemed to hide somewhere in the fog, and Mystery Inc. was about to discover that this would be no ordinary mystery. The mystery machine glided down the poorly lit road, each turn feeling like a dive into the unknown. The fog was a constant presence, dense and humid, enveloping the forest that bordered the road in a ghostly veil. The trees, with their twisted branches, looked like skeletal fingers scratching the gray sky. The silence was so oppressive that the slightest sound, the whine of tires on the wet asphalt, the ticking of the clock on the dashboard seemed amplified. A peculiar smell, a mixture of mold, metal, and something faintly sweet, invaded the car, making Shaggy's stomach rumble, but not from hunger. "Are we sure we didn't take a wrong turn, Fred?" he asked, his voice trembling as Scooby shivered beside him in the back seat, huddled like a frightened puppy, his ears flapping nervously with every bump. Fred, always the most rational of the group, consulted his map with an air of determination that couldn't quite disguise the slight tension in his shoulders. The dashboard light reflected in his eyes, revealing a subtle concern. "No, Shaggy. The map indicates this is the only road leading to the town. And, according to the coordinates, we're right in the center of Silent Hill." Velma, with her nose in a tablet that seemed terribly out of place in that macabre setting, mumbled, "It's a town with a peculiar history. Many reports of disappearances, supernatural events, and a religious cult that incites people to atone for their sins through suffering. It seems the town itself was built on an ancient site of dark rituals, where the line between reality and nightmare is thin." Daphne shivered, hugging herself tightly. The cold air seemed to penetrate her clothes. Suffering? But why would anyone want to go through that? Her eyes widened as she saw a dark, shapeless shadow move quickly on the side of the road, seeming to lurk among the trees. Did you see that? It was something big and distorted. Fred slammed on the brakes, making Scooby and Shaggy jump and collide with the front seats with a synchronized oof. What, Daphne? I didn't see anything. He turned on the high beams, which barely managed to penetrate the thick curtain of fog. Must have just been a wild animal. Maybe a bear or a large deer. A wild animal that looks like a doctor with a weird head, carrying a huge blade? Daphne stammered, her eyes still fixed on the spot where the shadow had disappeared. A cold shiver ran down her spine. Shaggy and Scooby exchanged a look of absolute panic. A doctor with a weird head? Ruh-roh! Scooby squeaked, burying his head under Shaggy's arm. That's no wild animal, Daphne. That's something out of the worst horror movies. Velma, seemingly oblivious to the rising panic, adjusted her glasses, her eyes fixed on the tablet screen. Interesting. Daphne's description fits some legendary creatures supposedly inhabiting Silent Hill, such as Pyramid Head or grotesque nurses. However, it's more likely to be just the fog playing tricks on your imagination, creating optical illusions due to the low visibility and the tension of the situation. A low, guttural growl, almost a lament, echoed from the forest, and the smell of mold intensified, mixed with something that resembled dried blood and oxidized iron. Scooby and Shaggy hugged each other tightly, trembling uncontrollably, their teeth chattering. It's not my imagination, Velma. And that smell. It's not rotten cheese, is it? Shaggy swallowed hard, feeling sweat trickle down his forehead. It smells like trouble. Fred, trying to remain calm, turned the car to the right, following what appeared to be the town's main street. The houses were old, with dark windows and curved roofs, looking like empty eyes watching them from the fog. The few streetlights flickered intermittently, creating dancing shadows that writhed and seemed to take on frightening shapes on the walls of the decaying buildings. With each flicker, the darkness seemed to deepen. I think it would be good to find a place to spend the night and wait for this fog to clear, Fred suggested, his voice a little more strained than usual, his gaze fixed on the almost invisible road. Maybe a hotel or something similar that's still operating, if anything here still operates. Suddenly, the Mystery Machine's lights flickered, dimmed, and then went out completely. The car coughed one last time, sputtered, and died, plunging them into almost total darkness, broken only by the flickering streetlights and the faint glow of Velma's tablet. The sudden silence was deafening. "Oh no, my Mystery Machine!" Fred exclaimed, hitting the dashboard in frustration. "What happened? I swear I checked the fuel level before we left." Velma turned on her tablet's flashlight, illuminating the car's interior. "It seems we're out of gas, Fred. Completely empty. And from what I see on my GPS, there are no gas stations nearby, not even within 100 kilometers. We'll have to walk. There's no other option." Shaggy let out a mournful groan, sliding down in his seat. "Walk? But what if the doctor with the weird head comes back? What if he has a giant scalpel and likes to snack on people who get lost in the fog?" Scooby barked in agreement, pawing at the car floor as if begging to get out. Daphne, who had recovered a bit from the scare, pointed to an old, imposing building, barely visible through the thick fog that enveloped it. "Look, it looks like a hotel. The sign is almost faded, but you can read Lakeview Hotel. Maybe we can get help there, or at least a phone to call for assistance." Fred nodded, grabbing his flashlight from the glove compartment. "Good idea, Daphne. It's our best bet. Let's go, gang. And stick together. We don't know what's out there. This place feels different from anything we've ever seen." As they got out of the car, the sound of the wind howling through the empty houses seemed to whisper dark, forgotten secrets. The hotel doors were ajar, revealing a darkness that was both inviting and menacing. A rusty sign swayed, creaking a sad lament in the breeze, looking like a hanging skeleton. Lakeview Hotel, it read, the letters almost erased by time and corrosion. A strong smell of sulfur and something sweet and nauseating, like decaying flowers, emanated from inside, drawing them into its mystery. Scooby and Shaggy hesitated, their feet seemingly glued to the ground, but the promise of shelter and the prospect of being found by something in the fog propelled them inside, where the true terror of Silent Hill awaited them. The Lakeview Hotel was a labyrinth of dark, dusty corridors, where every step echoed, amplifying the almost deafening silence. The air was heavy with the sweet, nauseating smell they had sensed outside, mixed with a stale odor of mold, decay, and something metallic. The peeling walls revealed faded floral wallpaper, now almost unrecognizable under layers of dirt and gloom, and the furniture covered by white sheets seemed to hide shapeless forms in the dim light, like ghosts waiting to materialize. Scooby and Shaggy walked glued to each other, their eyes wide, scanning every shadow, every corner, every crack. I don't like this place, Scooby. It feels like a ghost is going to jump out from behind that old couch any second, Shaggy whispered, pointing to a covered silhouette that resembled a coffin, his voice trembling so much it was barely audible. Fred, flashlight in hand, its beam dancing across the walls and floor, led the group with forced determination, his voice echoing through the corridors. Let's look for the reception. Maybe there's still someone here, or at least a phone to call for a tow. Who knows? Maybe they have a backup generator somewhere. Velma, always practical and curious, was already examining a dusty bookshelf in the lobby, her fingers tracing the titles, ignoring the sinister atmosphere around her. It's fascinating how the decay of this place reflects the dark atmosphere that surrounds it. There are some old diaries here, with notes about rituals and sacrifices. They seem to belong to members of a local cult. The pages are so old they crumble to the touch. She pulled out a leather-bound book, its pages yellowed and brittle, and began to leaf through it avidly, a gleam of discovery in her eyes. Daphne, meanwhile, was more concerned with the sensations the place conveyed to her. An inexplicable chill ran down her spine, and a sense of oppression invaded her. Don't you feel it? It's as if the very sadness of the town is ingrained in the walls, or as if something invisible is watching us. And I'm starting to have ... visions. She closed her eyes for a moment, her hands on her forehead, as if trying to push away the images. I saw a girl crying ... and a woman in black holding a baby, walking through these corridors with an expression of indescribable pain. Scooby and Shaggy let out a synchronized yikes, their legs wobbly. Visions? Oh no, Daphne. That's even worse than ghosts. At least ghosts we can unmask, but visions are like in your head. Calm down, everyone. Fred tried to reassure them, although his own voice was a little tense and he looked around more frequently. Daphne might be a little overwhelmed by the environment. Velma, have you found anything useful that explains this strange feeling? Velma pushed the book away a little, her glasses almost falling off her nose. These notes are quite disturbing. They talk about a cult that believes by ridding people of their sins through rituals, they purify the town and attract prosperity. There's mention of a spiritual guide and something called the atonement, which seems to be a painful process of purification. They say the town itself is a living purgatory, and the manifestations are just reflections of collective guilt. While Velma read, Scooby and Shaggy, with their always hungry stomachs, were drawn by a smell of food that seemed to come from the kitchen, a strangely tempting aroma of something fried, mixed with a hint of garlic. Do you smell that, Scooby? Smells like giant Scooby snacks, with extra cheese and spicy sauce. Shaggy exclaimed, following the scent with his nose, like a hunting dog on the trail of its prey. They barely noticed that the kitchen door was creaking, invitingly, yet sinisterly open, like a hungry mouth. Inside the kitchen, rusty pots and pans were scattered on the floor, and the smell of food was stronger, but mixed with a metallic odor, almost like blood. I think we got the smell wrong, Scooby. It's not Scooby Snacks, It's strange and a little scary, Shaggy mumbled, his voice failing. Suddenly, a loud scraping sound of metal dragging on the floor, like a heavy object being pulled, made them shrink behind a pile of dusty old boxes and empty cans. A tall, imposing figure with a triangular head and a huge sword, almost as tall as the creature itself, dragging on the floor, emerged from the back of the kitchen, appearing from the shadows like a materialized nightmare. Pyramid Head. Pyramid Head. He's real, Scooby squeaked, clinging to Shaggy with all his might, his fur bristling with fear. Run, Scooby, run! Don't look back. He's got a knife bigger than us. Shaggy yelled, and the two dashed out of the kitchen, their screams echoing through the hotel corridors, a chorus of pure terror. Their screams alarmed the rest of the group in the lobby. Shaggy, Scooby, what happened? Are you okay? Fred called, running towards the sounds, his flashlight swinging in his hand. The two appeared running, out of breath, their eyes wide with terror and their tongues hanging out. Pyramid Head. He has a giant knife and a triangle head, and he was cleaning it. Shaggy stammered, pointing behind them with a trembling finger. Velma raised an eyebrow, observing the direction they pointed, her skepticism challenged by the terrifying description. Pyramid Head? That's unexpected. The figure is more associated with a manifestation of the protagonist's guilt in Silent Hill folklore, not a physical creature that can be found in a hotel kitchen. Daphne, however, felt a different, deeper chill. The visions of the crying girl and the woman in black intensified in her mind. But what if it's not a legend? What if he's real? What if he's the spiritual guide Velma mentioned, or some kind of macabre guardian of the town? The sound of heavy, dragging footsteps approached from the kitchen corridor, the metallic scraping of the weapon echoing louder and louder. Fred swallowed hard, the flashlight in his hand trembling slightly. Well, Velma, maybe it's time to reevaluate your theories. It seems we have a very real problem on our hands, and it's approaching quickly. We need to find a safe place fast and figure out what's going on here before he finds us. As the footsteps approached, a colossal shadow projected onto the corridor wall, and the sound of metal scraping the floor grew louder and more menacing, seeming to tear through the silence. The group knew they couldn't stay there. They had to act, but where to go? And how to escape something that seemed straight out of a nightmare and, according to legends, couldn't be stopped. Pyramid Head's shadow stretched down the corridor, imposing and terrifying, and the metallic screech of his weapon against the floor became deafening, seeming to tear the air. The group knew they couldn't stand still. The creature moved with a deliberate slowness that made its advance even more frightening. Fred, his leadership instinct sharpened by adrenaline, pointed to a side door, almost hidden in the gloom. This way. It looks like a storage room. Quick, everyone in. They burst into the dark room, a heap of old, dust-covered objects, the smell of mold and cobwebs invading their nostrils. Velma quickly turned on her tablet's flashlight, revealing boxes stacked to the ceiling, broken furniture covered by sheets, and, to everyone's surprise, an old projection room, with rusty film reels scattered on the floor and a torn screen hanging on the wall. Pyramid Head stopped at the door, his imposing silhouette filling the doorway, his triangular head silhouetted against the scant light from the corridor. He raised his gigantic knife, and the metal glinted in the dim light, a sinister gleam. A guttural sound escaped from within his triangular mask, a growl that seemed to echo the very pain and suffering of a condemned soul. The creature seemed to be assessing the situation, its presence oppressive. Shaggy and Scooby hid behind a pile of old, dusty grain sacks, their bodies trembling like jelly. He found us, Scooby. We're doomed. There's no way out. We're going to be Pyramid Head's main course, Shaggy squeaked, covering his eyes with his hands. Calm down, guys, Fred whispered, watching the creature closely, his keen eye noticing something. He seems hesitant, as if he can't fully enter here. He's not advancing. Daphne, standing beside an old, dusty carved dresser, noticed something strange. A silver medallion hung from one of the poles, emitting a faint, almost imperceptible glow like a shooting star on a dark night. As soon as Pyramid Head approached the medallion, the creature recoiled abruptly, as if the object repelled him, letting out a louder, more irritated growl. "Look, the medallion!" Daphne exclaimed, carefully picking it up. It was cold to the touch, but emitted a strange, almost protective energy that seemed to calm the gloomy atmosphere. As soon as she held it, the figure recoiled even further, its growl intensifying in frustration and pain. "He doesn't seem to like this," she said, brandishing the medallion like a shield, feeling a spark of hope. Velma, with the ancient book in her hands, opened it to a specific page, her eyes scanning the words quickly. "I get it. This medallion is a sacred artifact of the cult, supposedly used to ward off evil spirits and manifestations of guilt. The book describes it as a seal of purity. It's as if Pyramid Head is one of those manifestations, a kind of macabre guardian who punishes sinners." "So, he's like a ghost with a giant gardening tool?" Shaggy asked, peeking from behind the sacks, still scared but curious. "Not exactly, Shaggy. From what the book describes, it's more a personification of guilt, a harbinger of remorse. He only attacks those who feel guilty about something, whether real or imaginary. His existence seems linked to the psyche of people who enter Silent Hill." Velma explained, her eyes fixed on the ancient words, a complex theory forming in her mind. Fred scratched his chin, thoughtful. "So, if we don't feel guilty, he can't get us? That's strange and quite convenient for us, but complicated for the poor tourists who come here." Daphne, however, felt a weight in her heart. The visions returned more intensely. The crying girl, the woman in black with the baby, the pain in their eyes. A guilt she couldn't identify gnawed at her, a sense of failure that didn't belong to her. The medallion, while protecting her, seemed to amplify her own insecurities, her deepest fears. "But what if we do feel guilty?" she murmured, her voice almost inaudible, fear returning to dominate her for a moment. Pyramid Head, frustrated and seemingly unable to cross the threshold protected by the medallion, gave one last furious growl and turned, dragging his sword down the corridor, the sound receding into the oppressive darkness. "He's gone!" Shaggy exclaimed, emerging from his hiding place, relief visible on his face. Fred sighed in relief. That was close. "Now, Velma, we need to understand this guilt thing and why it manifests this way. And who's behind all this, inducing these feelings in people." "According to this diary," Velma continued, quickly flipping through the pages, absorbing every detail, "the local cult known as the Order believes that the town of Silent Hill is a purgatory. They manipulate people into feeling guilty and thus purify their souls through rituals and manifestations like this. They believe this attracts prosperity to the town, revitalizing the local economy, which had been in decline after the closure of an old mine. They see guilt as an energy that can be channeled." "So, all this is to attract tourists?" Daphne asked, incredulous. "Turning people's guilt into monsters so they come here? That's a sick marketing plan." "It seems insane, but yes. The book talks about purification rituals that involve the manifestation of these creatures to cleanse the souls of sinners and, thus, attract more people to the town, boosting trade and tourism. It's a Machiavellian plan, but with a twisted logic," Velma replied, shaking her head in disapproval. "They're using local folklore for their own ends." Fred slammed his fist into his palm, his eyes shining with determination. "That's outrageous. They're scaring people for their own benefit. We need to unmask this cult and put an end to this charade once and for all. But how do we catch something that only appears to those who feel guilty? And who is the real mastermind behind all this?" Scooby and Shaggy who had found some tuna cans in the storage room and were struggling to open them, suddenly heard a distant sound, like a radio hissing. It was a voice distorted and terrifying, seeming to come from all directions. Impure souls... will be purified. Silent Hill awaits you. For the Great Awakening... Rrr, a ghost voice. And he's making a bizarre commercial. Scooby squeaked, dropping the tuna can. A ghost who likes radio. Should we turn it off? And we can grab some cheese crackers on the way, Shaggy suggested, pointing to the projection room where the sound seemed to originate. Velma approached the room, her eyes gleaming with a new theory. It's not a ghost, Shaggy. It's a loudspeaker. What if this cult is using these loudspeakers to transmit subliminal messages or induce people to feel guilty? We could use that to our advantage to expose them. What do you have in mind, Velma? Fred asked, a glint of excitement in his eyes, already thinking about complex traps. If they use the radio to induce guilt, we can use the radio to undo it. And what if we lure the cult leader into a trap, using their own guilt against them? We can transmit a message that forces him to reveal himself. Velma proposed, a confident smile forming on her face, her mind already working out the details. We need a plan, and I think I have the start of one. A plan to expose the truth and free Silent Hill from its own purgatory. Fred nodded in agreement. They had a plan. And Silent Hill was about to discover that Mystery Inc. was not easily fooled. Fred's plan was ready, meticulously drawn on a piece of old wallpaper found in the storage room, now transformed into a battle map. The projection room, once dusty and abandoned, had been turned into an impromptu command center, lit by Fred's flashlight and Velma's tablet glow. Fred drew a diagram on the floor, using pieces of chalk they'd found in an old toy box. All right, gang, here's the plan to unmask this spiritual guide and his crazy cult. He pointed to the diagram with a stick. The idea is to use the hotel's sound system to broadcast a message that will confuse the spiritual guide and lure him into our trap. Scooby and Shaggy, you two will be the bait. And don't worry, you'll be safe, I promise. Shaggy and Scooby exchanged a look of panic that only they could communicate, their eyes wide. Bait? For Pyramid Head? But he's so big and has such a pointy knife. Shaggy squeaked, trembling. Oh no, Fred, that's too dangerous. What if we turn into chopped up Shaggy bits? Calm down, Shaggy, Fred reassured him, with a confident smile, trying to ease the tension. You won't be alone. The trap is simple. We're going to use these wires here. He pointed to a tangled mess of electrical wires that seemed to have been pulled from the walls and some old equipment, to create a magnetic field that will disorient anything based on psychic energy, like Pyramid Head and other manifestations. Velma, your part is crucial. You're going to use the sound system to broadcast a message of peace of mind and freedom from guilt, something that goes against everything the cult preaches, undermining the foundation of their manipulation. Velma adjusted her glasses, already working on the projection room equipment, her nimble fingers connecting wires and adjusting frequencies. Understood, Fred. I'll use the hotel's radio frequency to spread a message of self-confidence and acceptance, a voice that calms the mind. If the guilt theory is correct, this should disturb the cultists and, who knows, even destabilize the manifestations, revealing their true nature. Daphne, who was examining the old film reels, had an idea that lit up her face. What if we project some images onto the screen? Like images of happy places, laughing people, animals playing. Something that contrasts with the darkness they're trying to create. Something that radiates positivity and hope. Fred smiled, clapping his hands lightly. Excellent idea, Daphne. That will create an even more impactful visual effect. Shaggy, Scooby, you'll stay in the hallway, near the hotel's main entrance, where the sound and projection system has the widest range. When you hear the message and see the images, you start making your usual scared noises. but in an exaggerated way, to attract the spiritual guide's attention. He'll think you're full of guilt and come after you. Then, when he's at the right spot, right in the center of the area I've designated, I'll spring the trap." Scooby and Shaggy hugged each other, but some of the tension had subsided with the clarity of the plan and the promise that they wouldn't actually be harmed. "We're really good at making scared noises, Fred. We're pros at it," Shaggy said with a nervous grin, and Scooby let out a proud "Ruh-huh." Setting up the trap was comically chaotic, yet efficient. Fred tried to unravel the electrical wires, which seemed to have a life of their own, tangling around his feet and arms, making him almost fall several times. Scooby and Shaggy, tasked with strategically positioning some boxes for the visual trap, ended up knocking over a pile of rusty food cans, creating a deafening crash that made Fred jump 3 feet in the air. Daphne and Velma, meanwhile, were focused on the technical aspects. Daphne searched for vibrant and joyful images on her phone, while Velma adjusted the radio controls, grumbling about the hotel's outdated technology and how surprising it was that it still worked. Finally, everything was ready. Fred gave the signal. Velma turned on the sound system, and a calm, reassuring voice echoed through the hotel corridors, filling the air with a message of hope. "Release the burden of guilt. Peace resides within you. Accept yourself, and fear will dissipate. You are free. You are strong. You are worthy." At the same time, Daphne activated the projector, and colorful images of flowery fields under a bright sun, children laughing in playgrounds, and dogs running freely filled the dark, moldy walls of the hotel. Pyramid Head, who had been lurking in the darkness of an adjacent corridor, seemed to hesitate. Velma's message and Daphne's images seemed to deeply disturb him, causing the creature to stagger. Scooby and Shaggy then began their act. Help! I'm feeling immense guilt for eating Fred's last cookie, and mine too, and Scooby's, and the ones I was saving for dinner." Shaggy yelled, with Scooby loudly agreeing, making exaggerated crying noises. The creature began to move, slowly, dragging its weapon, drawn by Shaggy's and Scooby's guilt cries, which seemed to be an irresistible magnet. He entered the trap point. "Now, Fred, now." "He's right in the center," Velma shouted, her eyes fixed on the control panel. Fred pulled a makeshift lever connected to the electrical wires. An electrical hiss filled the air, and the remaining lights in the hotel flickered violently. An invisible energy field formed, surrounding Pyramid Head. The creature let out a grunt of pain, stumbling and struggling, its triangular head seemingly trembling violently, its form distorting slightly. But suddenly, a loud crack and a burning smell filled the air. One of the wires came loose with a flash, and the magnetic field failed. Pyramid Head, with one last roar of fury and frustration, its form seeming to solidify again, ran out of the trap, its silhouette disappearing into the darkness of the corridor, like a nightmare fading away. "No, he escaped. My infallible plan," Fred exclaimed, hitting the floor in frustration, his bandana slipping slightly. He's still out there." "And now he knows we tried to trap him," Scooby squeaked, clinging to Shaggy, who was already as pale as a sheet. Silence once again hung in the air, broken only by the radio static and Daphne's images projected on the walls, which now seemed even more ironic in the darkness. The plan had failed, or had it? The fog outside seemed to have thickened even more, and the sense of danger intensified. The spiritual guide was still at large, and Mystery Inc. needed a new strategy, and fast, before Silent Hill swallowed them forever. The failure of the trap reverberated in the silence of the Lakeview Hotel, leaving a bitter taste of frustration. The faulty electricity and the smell of ozone mingled with the mold, creating an even more oppressive atmosphere. Fred, though disappointed, slammed his fist on the floor with determination. He might have escaped the trap, but we know he's nearby. And now he knows we're after him, which gives us an advantage. He's scared. Velma, with her glasses on the tip of her nose, was already analyzing the loose wires with an improvised multimeter. The failure was in the contact, Fred, but the good news is that our message and the images deeply disturbed them. That means we're on the right track to unmask this charlatan. The truth is about to be revealed, and he knows it. Suddenly, the sound of hurried footsteps and a muffled scream echoed from upstairs, cutting through the silence like a blade. "Help! Someone help me, please!" "Looks like someone else is in trouble," Daphne exclaimed, her intuition sharpened. She ran towards the staircase, her red hair fluttering behind her. Fred, Velma, Scooby, and Shaggy followed her quickly, their hearts beating faster. Upstairs, in a dimly lit corridor, bathed in a faint light coming from the fog-covered windows, they found a hooded figure wearing a dark, dirty robe, dragging a frightened woman towards a rusty door, which seemed to lead to a service room. It was a tense and comical chase at the same time. The hooded figure, who appeared to be one of the cultists, tripped over himself as he tried to control the struggling woman, her screams echoing. The cultist seemed clumsy and nervous. "Stop right there, you masked villain," Fred yelled, running forward, his flashlight pointed at the cultist's face. The cultist, surprised and terrified, let go of the woman and tried to flee. But Shaggy and Scooby, with a heroic "Ruh-roh" and a last-second coordinated plan, launched themselves at him. Their legs tangled in their own feet, but they managed to tackle the hooded figure into a pile of dirty, dusty sheets, which seemed to have come from an abandoned closet. "We got him, Fred. He's not going anywhere," Shaggy exclaimed, proud, holding the cultist's legs with Scooby. As Fred and Velma approached the immobilized cultist, Daphne ran to the frightened woman, helping her up. "Are you okay? Who are you? What did they want with you?" The woman, still trembling and panting, revealed herself to be a tourist who got lost in the fog and ended up at the hotel seeking shelter. They tried to take me for a purification ritual. They said I was guilty for not recycling my trash last week and for forgetting my aunt's birthday. They knew everything. She seemed shocked and indignant. "Not recycling trash and for forgetting your aunt's birthday? That's ridiculous. That's absurd," Fred exclaimed, tying up the cultist with a rope he always carried in his pocket for emergencies. Velma knelt down and, with a quick movement, pulled off the figure's hood. To everyone's surprise, it wasn't the spiritual guide they expected, but rather the hotel manager, a pale man with a thin mustache and a terribly nervous appearance. It was Mr. Abernathy. "Mr. Abernathy? What's going on here? Are you one of the cultists?" I'm just an employee. I was forced." "The spiritual guide is in the basement. He's preparing the final ritual, the great sacrifice to purify the city." Abernathy stammered. The fear in his eyes was genuine, and he pointed to the floor. "The basement!" Fred exclaimed, his mind processing the information. He must be using a secret entrance to operate Pyramid Head and the sound system. That's where the real control is. Daphne, with a flash of inspiration, remembered something she had noticed earlier. "I saw a hidden trapdoor in the kitchen. The one Scooby and Shaggy ran out of when they first saw Pyramid Head. It was almost imperceptible, but it was there." Everyone rushed to the kitchen, where Daphne, using a rusty crowbar that Fred found, managed to pry open a hidden trapdoor under a pile of old boxes and kitchen utensils. A strong smell of sulfur and ozone rose from the hole, and a faint pulsating light shone below, like the beat of a dark heart. With Fred leading the way, flashlight in hand, they descended a rusty metal ladder that creaked with every step. The basement was a tangle of pipes, exposed wires, and old electrical equipment, which buzzed and sparked. In the center of the room, illuminated by flickering lights, was the spiritual guide, an imposing figure in a dark robe and a mask that resembled a stylized skull made of polished metal. Beside him, a complex mechanism with wires and coils projected the image of Pyramid Head onto the wall through a system of carefully positioned lenses and mirrors. So, Pyramid Head is just a projection. I knew he was too scary to be real. Shaggy exclaimed, relieved, letting out a deep sigh. The spiritual guide turned, his voice distorted and echoing from a microphone built into the mask. Intruders! You will not stop the purification of Silent Hill. The city needs its atonement to flourish again. He tried to activate another Pyramid Head, but Velma, acting quickly, threw the medallion Daphne had found into one of the projection mechanism circuits. A short circuit occurred. Sparks flew through the air. The smell of burning wire spread, and the image of Pyramid Head flickered and disappeared, leaving only the empty wall. The spiritual guide let out a roar of fury and charged, his robe fluttering, revealing the silhouette of an ordinary man. Fred, with his final plan in mind, threw a fishing net he had found in the mystery machine, entangling the spiritual guide and bringing him to the ground with a thud. Scooby and Shaggy, in a disorganized but incredibly effective move, jumped on top of him, holding him down, barking and squealing in victory. "Oh, rah, rah, rah. We got the main monster, Fred. He won't scare anyone anymore," Scooby barked, wagging his tail. Fred quickly removed the spiritual guide's mask. To everyone's surprise, the man behind the mask was the town's mayor, Mr. Albright. His face was sweaty, and his gaze, once intimidating, was now one of pure despair. "The mayor? I don't believe it," Daphne exclaimed, shocked. Velma, observing the mayor handcuffed with Fred's rope, smiled triumphantly. "All the clues fit together, guys. The guilt messages on the radio, the visions induced by the artificial fog and gases, the monster projections. The mayor was using Silent Hill's folklore to manipulate people and make them believe the town was a purgatory. He fabricated reports of sins so people would feel guilty and thus seek purification in the cult, which was actually just a scheme to attract tourists and revitalize the local economy. Pyramid Head was just an elaborate light and smoke projection to scare people and make them buy the expensive sacred artifacts and purification rituals the cult was selling. But that's terrible. To trick people like that, exploiting their fears," Daphne said, shaking her head in disbelief, sadness in her eyes. Mystery Inc. had solved another mystery, but the truth behind this one was far more bizarre and disturbing than any rubber monster they had ever unmasked. With Mayor Albright unmasked and tied to a chair with his own cultist robe, the atmosphere in the basement of the Lakeview Hotel, which had been tense, began to dissipate, giving way to comical relief. The mayor, still grumbling and struggling in the fishing net with Scooby and Shaggy on top of him, looked like a big, trapped fish. They would never understand. Silent Hill was dying, the mines closed, tourism dried up. We needed to push something dramatic to bring people back. And nothing is more dramatic than a good old soul purification. Velma, with a satisfied smile, explained to a police officer who had arrived, along with some curious residents and Mr. Abernathy, the mayor's intricate plan. He used industrial fog generators to create this suffocating and dense atmosphere, hidden loudspeakers throughout the town to transmit subliminal guilt messages. And Daphne's visions were, in fact, advanced holographic projections mixed with hallucinogenic gases released in the fog, which he controlled remotely like a maestro of nightmares. The monsters, like Pyramid Head, were just elaborate light and smoke projections to scare people and make them fall for the cult scam and buy the exorbitantly priced sacred artifacts and purification rituals. Daphne, still a little pale from the experience of the visions, commented indignantly, "So, all the people who felt guilty about silly things, like not recycling trash or forgetting a birthday, were tricked into paying for something that didn't even exist. How horrible! Exploiting people's faith and fears is cruel. Horrible and brilliant, if you think about it, from a purely strategic standpoint," Fred said, scratching his chin, assessing the plan with a detective's air. He used people's fear and guilt against them to boost tourism. Almost the most bizarre and dishonest marketing manual I've ever seen. But still, a perfect trap for Mystery Inc. Shaggy and Scooby, satisfied with a job well done and the assurance that there were no real ghosts or giant monsters to snack on people, were now busy eating the Scooby snacks Fred offered with renewed appetite. Well, at least we won't have to worry about feeling guilty about not having cookies, right, Scooby? Because now we have plenty, Shaggy said, with a mouthful, offering a cookie to the tied-up mayor, who glared at him with contempt. "Ruh-huh," Scooby agreed, wagging his tail vigorously, his eyes sparkling with joy. Mayor Albright, finally untied and escorted out by a police officer, cast one last furious look at Mystery Inc., his face twisted in a scowl. "You ruined everything. Silent Hill will never be the same. Now who will want to come to a town without scary monsters and purification rituals? My economy is ruined." Daphne smiled gently. "Perhaps, Mr. Mayor, people will come because of its natural beauty or its rich history without needing a fake cult. Or maybe, who knows, Silent Hill could become a great place for artisan cheese conventions, and Shaggy was so eager for one." She winked at Fred. Fred laughed, shaking his head. "That's right, Daphne. A cheese convention without scares and with lots of flavor. And who knows, maybe we'll even come back to try the local cheese when it's free of all this fog and guilt. But for now, I think we're ready for our next adventure. And I hope there are no more heads of state involved." Velma, meanwhile, was already on her tablet, frantically researching. "Speaking of adventures, I just got a notification about a urban legends festival in a remote mountain village. They say there's a Bigfoot that steals all the blankets from campsites and hides all the cooking pots. Sounds like another case for Mystery Inc. And this time, I hope there's no hallucinogenic gas involved." Scooby and Shaggy groaned in unison, a mix of fear and dismay. "Bigfoot who steals blankets. Raro. That sounds colder than scary. And without pots, how are we going to make our giant Scooby sandwiches?" Fred started the mystery machine, which had been mysteriously refueled and repaired by the local police. The engine purred smoothly. "Let's go, gang. Looks like Mystery Inc. has another mystery to solve. And who knows, maybe this time we'll find a giant cheese cookie on the way, or a Bigfoot who just wants to be our friend." The mystery machine sped out of Silent Hill, leaving the fog and mysteries behind, and taking with it the promise of new and exciting adventures, always with plenty of humor and a good Scooby snack in the back seat, ready to unmask anyone who tried to fool people. With Mayor Albright unmasked and tied to a chair with his own cultist robe, the atmosphere in the basement of the Lakeview Hotel, which had been tense, began to dissipate, giving way to comical relief. The mayor, still grumbling and struggling in the fishing net with Scooby and Shaggy on top of him, looked like a big, trapped fish. They would never understand. Silent Hill was dying, the mines closed, tourism dried up. We needed to push something dramatic to bring people back. And nothing is more dramatic than a good old soul purification. Velma, with a satisfied smile, explained to a police officer who had arrived, along with some curious residents and Mr. Abernathy, the mayor's intricate plan. He used industrial fog generators to create this suffocating and dense atmosphere, hidden loudspeakers throughout the town to transmit subliminal guilt messages. And Daphne's visions were, in fact, advanced holographic projections mixed with hallucinogenic gases released in the fog, which he controlled remotely like a maestro of nightmares. The monsters, like Pyramid Head, were just elaborate light and smoke projections to scare people and make them fall for the cult scam and buy the exorbitantly priced sacred artifacts and purification rituals. Daphne, still a little pale from the experience of the visions, commented indignantly, "So, all the people who felt guilty about silly things, like not recycling trash or forgetting a birthday, were tricked into paying for something that didn't even exist. How horrible! Exploiting people's faith and fears is cruel. Horrible and brilliant, if you think about it, from a purely strategic standpoint, Fred said, scratching his chin, assessing the plan with a detective's air. He used people's fear and guilt against them to boost tourism. Almost the most bizarre and dishonest marketing manual I've ever seen. But still, a perfect trap for Mystery Inc. Shaggy and Scooby, satisfied with a job well done and the assurance that there were no real ghosts or giant monsters to snack on people, were now busy eating the Scooby snacks Fred offered with renewed appetite. Well, at least we won't have to worry about feeling guilty about not having cookies, right, Scooby? Because now we have plenty, Shaggy said, with a mouthful, offering a cookie to the tied-up mayor, who glared at him with contempt. "Ruh-huh," Scooby agreed, wagging his tail vigorously, his eyes sparkling with joy. Mayor Albright, finally untied and escorted out by a police officer, cast one last furious look at Mystery Inc., his face twisted in a scowl. "You ruined everything. Silent Hill will never be the same. Now who will want to come to a town without scary monsters and purification rituals? My economy is ruined." Daphne smiled gently. "Perhaps, Mr. Mayor, people will come because of its natural beauty, or its rich history, without needing a fake cult. Or maybe, who knows, Silent Hill could become a great place for artisan cheese conventions, and Shaggy was so eager for one." She winked at Fred. Fred laughed, shaking his head. "That's right, Daphne. A cheese convention without scares and with lots of flavor. And who knows, maybe we'll even come back to try the local cheese when it's free of all this fog and guilt. But for now, I think we're ready for our next adventure. And I hope there are no more heads of state involved." Velma, meanwhile, was already on her tablet, frantically researching. "Speaking of adventures, I just got a notification about a urban legends festival in a remote mountain village. They say there's a Bigfoot that steals all the blankets from campsites and hides all the cooking pots. Sounds like another case for Mystery Inc. And this time, I hope there's no hallucinogenic gas involved." Scooby and Shaggy groaned in unison, a mix of fear and dismay. "Bigfoot who steals blankets. Raro. That sounds colder than scary. And without pots, how are we going to make our giant Scooby sandwiches?" Fred started the mystery machine, which had been mysteriously refueled and repaired by the local police. The engine purred smoothly. "Let's go, gang. Looks like Mystery Inc. has another mystery to solve. And who knows, maybe this time we'll find a giant cheese cookie on the way, or a Bigfoot who just wants to be our friend." The mystery machine sped out of Silent Hill, leaving the fog and mysteries behind, and taking with it the promise of new and exciting adventures, always with plenty of humor and a good Scooby snack in the back seat, ready to unmask anyone who tried to fool people.